The subject of today's chat is accelerating innovation. We're going to be talking about how to design game-changing products and mobile apps. We're primarily focused on how you can innovate like a major company, even if you're a small company. How you can create, truly transformative applications, even if you don't have the capacity internally to do that. This is going to be a very introductory conversation on it. We're primarily talking about toolkits and ways of looking at innovation and ways of shifting internal ideologies and how to look at your next project. Okay, so in the first part, we're going to be talking about how you can innovate on a small budget. It's always a challenge for companies to look at, the Googles, the Netflixes of the world. They're like, these guys have tons of R&D budget. A third of their budget may be in R&D. How can I use that effectively from my standpoint? Now, what we've learned, something that Brittany has definitely taken away from her years working big brands is they don't do what they do very well quite often. There's a lot of lessons we can take from them, and a lot of lessons that'll save you a crap ton of money, in all honesty. You may have heard this many, many times, but failure is the true indicator of innovation. It's those who've learned to fail well that will truly stand up and do it better next time. Some people will say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but those of us who have actually succeeded in really spectacular ways have learned that no, that's not really insanity. Insanity is believing that you can't achieve something that you know you can. So, yeah.
So we want to start by looking at a couple of case studies and really looking at how do you actually innovate if you aren't these people? What are the things that we can learn from what has happened from other people's failures? So if we look at something like Amazon, they are quite an amazing success story, but they came on the backs of big companies that really relied on the old way of doing things. They assumed that they knew their customers, that just because something had worked for them throughout the past, that it will continue to work for them, and they will continue to be successful at it. But what really happened is that they didn't predict where their customers were moving and what their expectations were. They didn't see that people wanted something different. They didn't see that the habits were changing, that the technologies were changing, the way that people wanted to interact with the brands and create a new experience. And the interesting thing about it is that a lot of the companies that we now consider great innovators were actually epic failures at one point. Netflix actually was begging Blockbuster to purchase them at one point. They went from being a direct-to-home DVD mail service to understanding that there was a digital opportunity, and they wanted to get in on the ground floor, and they saw it as a pivot opportunity, but they were trying to get in with the big guys. They tried to come in and say, we will run Blockbuster's digital arm. And Blockbuster basically said, no thanks, we don't need you. We don't need you. Google is a company that is constantly failing for the sake of learning and continuing to move forward. And this game glitch is actually what ended up becoming Slack. So they were originally a video game company that had a couple successful games. They really were building their own audience, but they realized that there wasn't their operating costs were so much higher than the potential revenue that they were getting. And so they decided to pivot and actually build out the internal communication platform that they were using for their own company that they had built from the communication platform within the game. So just getting a quick, oh, okay, never mind. Oh, we've got someone in the waiting room. Let's add them.
Okay, welcome to the chat. Brittany is just a couple minutes in at this point. We introduced to you a couple of the people that we're going to be going through some material pretty quickly. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask. Get us to slow down, whatever you need. This is intended to be, a conversation starter and definitely more of an open forum.
Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about right now is that a lot of these companies that we now know as being innovative and successful have actually had, at least one fairly major pivot point where they were failing, they weren't finding that success point, and they had to learn from the failures that they were having. So what it really comes down to is innovators need to rethink the box, but also the opportunity. So they need to understand where things are going and be willing to continually test and adjust as they need to.
Yeah. So the example here is Brittany was just a second ago mentioning Netflix. Netflix came in with a small idea. How can we get rid of late fees? This is such a simple human problem, but they thought that they were in a small box. And this is the challenge. They envisioned Blockbuster as the champion company, the one that actually they looked up to. But then they realized that they actually had transformed how people consume content. And by looking at their problem and expanding on it, they've actually re-envisioned one of the biggest limitations of that industry, and that is, how can we deliver content in the way that people want? They transformed into a very user-centric model, and it effectively killed Blockbuster.
Yeah, so, when they came to Blockbuster and begged them to purchase them so that they can help them re-envision what a digital experience could be, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to Netflix. So companies that are innovative, they not only reframe the box that they're playing in, they not only envision those lines being a little bit blurrier, but they also see what other people are too stubborn to see. So, they see the status quo, but they also see the cracks through them. They see those little moments that people just chalk up to. So Airbnb, one of the things that's really interesting about them is it's not like they looked at it and said, there's this huge gaping hole in the market. But what they did see is that there were two options. You could basically go and you could stay in a hotel and you'll get the exact same experience anywhere you go in the world, or you can stay in a hostel. There wasn't anything in between. And the problem was that people were actually retrofitting themselves to fit within either of those experiences. So it's not like there were people saying, I need this. They just saw that people weren't happy or satisfied with the experience, but it was good enough. They were making do with it. So this is actually a yurt that we stayed in Spain, up in the mountainside, that I literally stayed in because I was like, when will I ever get to stay in a yurt? And this is an amazing experience, being able to create new things for people. Escape rooms. Who would have expected that people would want to lock themselves in a room for an hour with their friends or with strangers and have to pretend like they're in a movie and solve some sort of big mystery? And then Medellin, Colombia is a really interesting one because this is an area that used to be the murder capital of the world. This community that you see right here actually was the most dangerous community in the world at one point. And the city came in and said, it is inaccessible. People aren't able to grow if people can't get in and out of the community. So they did very simple technological innovations. They brought in escalators. They brought in cable cars that were part of the city transit system. And they gave people paint. And they prompted them to show a creative expression that made people happy and want to be there and want to spend time there. So really, at the core of it is when you want to create something more innovative, especially when you have a small budget, we need to figure out how to focus on the very human problems. We can say that there is a problem that my business wants to solve, but until you get to the root core of why a human needs to care about that and how it impacts their life, you're going to be spinning your wheels quite a bit. So, an interesting thing is Pay by Phone. So this is a company that came out of Vancouver and have become wildly successful for a very simple thing. They realize that people hate getting parking tickets, and sometimes meetings run long. You might be in a meeting that's only supposed to be 30 minutes long, and it runs for an hour and a half. How do you address that? Ways. They took on Google Maps, which everyone thought was crazy, but because they created a nice partnership that sort of gamified map finding, they took the stress out of finding the fastest route. It was more about how do I direct people in a really, truly human way. And they now are partnered with Uber and have quite a big market share that people weren't expecting. And then Slack, emails don't work, chat programs are too basic for work projects, and people get distracted by them. So how do we create something that is a hybrid between the two that works for people? So we're also told that new technologies are changing the world. So, there's all these big buzzwords: virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, that all seem really a little overwhelming when you're a smaller business or when you're working with companies that are small and medium-sized businesses. But at the core of them, they're going to become successful when we figure out the real human reasons for them. Virtual reality, we crave new and unique experiences. You can now go and travel anywhere in the world. You can be, 100 feet underwater and see what that would be like without ever having to leave where you are. 3D printing, we have this desire to want to create and make things in a really low barrier way, and 3D printing is now able to allow us to do that. And then artificial intelligence, we want to be treated and communicated with personally. We're giving up so much information. How do we then create that respectful relationship? So a couple quick guidelines to help spur innovation. So one, your company must create a culture of play that celebrates failure. So it's all about, for the people who missed it at the beginning, we were talking about this quote by Thomas Edison, where he basically said, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. And really, it's all about failure is an opportunity to learn, to pivot, and to continue to play and create. So the second one is focus on solving the simple, real, core human problems. It's really about not a business problem necessarily, but what is the human issue behind that. 3, always challenge the whys that made your business successful so far. So just because something made you successful doesn't mean that you should ignore that, but constantly asking, is that still the case? Is that still what our customers want? Does that still fit their lives? Are our customers still our customers? So the companies that are more innovative are the ones that really continue to question that and build that into their corporate culture. And the last one is remember why your customers trust you and embrace the responsibility to be better. If you trust and embrace who your customers are, they themselves want to be better. And part of them using your service or your product is always going to be because of what that means or does for them. So give that back the other way. And then in terms of creating innovation on a small budget, these are some of the tools and some of the ways that companies can do this. So one is really understanding a minimal viable product. So this is, until it's tangible, it doesn't exist. Create, fail, and learn faster. If you have an idea, make it something that someone else can play with. Make it something that someone else can start using and can grasp the minimum parts of it that allow them to get to that end result. This can be done cheaply and quite quickly. Innovation labs. So this is something that's becoming a bigger thing, especially when it comes to a large organization. But just because large companies like the Procter & Gamble's and the big banks and all of these larger behemoths are doing this doesn't mean that you as a smaller company can't do this. So this is really allowing people to disrupt from within by giving them, whether it's a team that does this or whether it's literally just 5 hours a week, where we say, you don't need to live within the parameters of what your normal job is. You have an opportunity right now for 5 hours to play, to change the rules and see what you can do with it. Number 3 is prototyping. So this sort of goes along with minimum viable product, but it's creating that minimum viable concept even. It's how do you create something and give it to someone else to play around with and to test, and what can you learn from that? And then at the end of that is also research. So, studying motivations, people's dreams, culture, user data interfaces, but making sure that you always have measurable testing outcomes and learning opportunities. So one that's really interesting, just a quick side story, a little sidebar, but there was actually this instance where Johnson & Johnson has a contact lens brand, and they were looking at all of their user data and who are the people that are purchasing their products and what can they learn from them. And they kept coming back to this idea that it's like these sort of mid-aged females who are buying their products. So they were like, we need to keep marketing to them, we need to keep telling them and giving them offers. And they were finding that they were having to give offers all of the time. And then as soon as they started looking at alternative forms of data, they started looking at the social listening. So this the social sentiment and what people were saying about that brand. And they started to realize when they looked at what people were saying about their brand, but also competitor brands, they started to realize that there was actually a massive market of males who wanted to buy their products but were really intimidated or didn't understand. And what they came to the realization of was that women actually are their prime purchasers because they use makeup. They are used to touching their eyes. They're used to having things on their face, around their face. Whereas men don't. They're not comfortable with touching their eyeballs. They don't know what's healthy or what's safe. They don't understand whether or not the way that they're feeling when they put a foreign object in their eyeball is normal or not. And so they realized that they actually had a huge market that they were underserving because they weren't doing the proper research. They weren't looking at measurable outcomes beforehand. And so they created this whole new campaign that was all about educating men and making them feel comfortable and celebrated.
So before we dive into product strategy, does anyone have any questions related to what we just covered there? Okay. I'll keep going then. Now that we've talked specifically about how to create innovation and the strategic approach to innovation, everyone is definitely most focused on, well, how do I apply it to my business? How do I create something that is special? What are the steps I need to take? In this, there's this ironic piece about good design. There's an ironic piece about good products, and the chief design officer of Apple here is saying it. It's effectively that a great product is invisible. Great solutions are ones that make a problem seem like it never even happened. And that is really the core of what needs to underline a great product that you're going to execute next time. Good products are beautiful. We can all agree that Teslas are beautiful. But the fact is, there are a lot of issues underlying what a Tesla is, what it costs, the infrastructure around it. That means that there still is a friction there. Great products are invisible. We look at Google, we see something that is so simple, so ingrained in our daily life that you truly can't even imagine what it was like before. And that is the definition of something that is spectacular. Now, before we dive into the steps to do this, I choose to typically divide this up into 5 groups. Defining a problem is something that ironically has been a challenge for corporations for many, many years. The rise of design thinking as a subject is so big and so dominant because companies and so-called business leaders haven't really been able to take themselves out of the challenge. They've been stuck looking at it from a tunnel vision or from the same view constantly. We look at competition. We look at competition in the standpoint of like, well, they have finances we want, they have market share we want, but truly, what are the lessons we can take from them? What are the strengths, the weaknesses, the failures that they've had? Now, there's also a reason that startups have been dominating in terms of disruption, and it's because they think like a startup. Now, what the heck does that mean? It means they always think with a tight budget. They think from what is the next step I can take if it was the last step I will ever make. It needs to matter. It needs to have a purpose. There needs to be a step following that. It needs to be measurable. Now, failure is another part of creating a game-changing product. Every app fails. Every app has issues. Your adoption will be poor. You'll have bugs. You'll be missing a key feature. This is the reality, and you need to prepare for it. And a part of this is understanding your customer, understanding what allowances they'll give you, but also understanding what the market has tolerance for. Because there's certain features where if you can knock that feature out, no one cares about anything else. But then most important is wowing customers. A lot of the greatest products start off with something ridiculously simple, but then they launch features, they launch campaigns that take it over the edge. They take it from something with adoption to addiction. We're going to look at maps. Maps are a very simple part of our life, and it is, again, one of these examples of how Google took a problem that used to be friction-laden in the past. I remember road trips where you'd have to read atlases and have to figure out what the next place to go is and zoom in and find out what the right page. But somehow Google Maps has taken that out completely. What have they done? The first thing is they need to understand how the industry was looking at the problem. At that time, people were expected to buy a map for each place they wanted to visit. This was the industry standard. Looking back at it, it's a little hard to remember that, but this was the reality. You drive to a new state, a new province, a new city, you're expected to buy a new piece of content. But what was the human problem in that? The problem is that people don't care about the maps. They just want to know how to get somewhere now. And the real problem underlying all this is basically that maps were trying to sell content. They weren't trying to solve problems. Now enter MapQuest. MapQuest was the dominant online mapping software in 2000 up until Google Maps showed up. They still have a significant market share and power a lot of applications that have mapping features, but I don't know those of us who can remember it, this was the interface they had in 2000, and we were wowed back then. But let's look at the strengths. You know, they were powered by GPS technology that was pretty new to the market. It transformed how we look at data. It made mapping an open data infrastructure, something that really changed how APIs worked, and it's something that had a lot of impact beyond that. But more than that, in 2000, they were acquired by AOL. So AOL, for those who don't remember, AOL was the Google of that era. They were the single most dominant digital brand of that time, and they crashed hard largely because of failures to turn MapQuest and other acquisitions into something that was truly user-centric. Now, what were the failures at those times? Well, first off, you can look at it. It's quite simple. It's not solving the problem. It is looking at data as if it's data. It's like looking at a spreadsheet. It doesn't solve, like, what is the data telling me? It doesn't help me search for and find things in a very simple way, the way we look at things. Back at that point, if you were misspelling your address, or if you didn't have the exact name, or the place wasn't listed, it was useless. But beyond that, the UI was a challenge. Every time you zoomed in, it had to refresh. Every time you moved, it had an issue. So it wasn't a smart UI for people who were on the move. Now, Google comes in. They think like a startup. They have to identify what the single most important problem is to solve. And it's quite simple. It's quickly help someone find how to get somewhere. This is what people wanted. Now, what would they need to gain that adoption? They're going to need a powerful database of streets, shops, attractions, addresses. This is the key to unlocking the power that MapQuest did not at the time. Now, what would they need to actually reach that level of addiction? Features that are commonplace now, like finding the fastest route, show me what the location looks like, tell me more about the location. Anyone who traveled significantly back then would know that these would be the holy grail of solutions, but at that time, no company was truly trying to solve them in a way that had a long-term vision. Now, the MVP launches of Google Maps. They have to identify what those features are. Now, what did they do? They wanted to change the industry that was reliant on something. They wanted to provide maps with something contextual. They wanted to provide recommendations. They wanted to provide information about the location. But what did they do? They did something that actually many startups are becoming smarter and smarter to do, but Google was one of the first to do. They focused on their strength. In this case, their maps were powered by MapQuest, and then they overlaid their insanely powerful data set over top. They provided recommendations over top. They provided related information over top. They turned their competitor into their biggest strength, ironically. And by doing that, they actually effectively executed MapQuest, because from that point forward, MapQuest became strictly a technology platform and not a customer application. Now, I don't know those of you who can remember this. This is about 2005, 2006. Google Earth showed up. Google Earth was something that was utterly mind-shattering for those of us who saw it. I remember the day that I first saw it, we were in our office, and you could zoom around the Himalayas. It was something spectacular. Now here they also show you, they give you the opportunity to go to Tower of Pisa, the Golden Gate Bridge, Matterhorn. It gave you the ability to experience something that you didn't think you ever would digitally. So this is the first instance of virtual reality really impacting our lives. It gave us the control to move through something. It gave Google the ability to truly wow. And that's the thing, is you need to prepare to wow them. You need to showcase exactly what your long-term vision is. And for Google at the time, for Google Maps, what is that game-changing data set that they would need? And for them, they're a data company. Google's primary focus in the world is to index and simplify data. That's it. And in this case, is they need a rich data set to identify what a location is, what's there, why are people going there, what's the relationship between things, how do you move from place to place. And this is what powers their shock and awe campaigns. In 2005, again, Google Earth was used to showcase views of the moon, but then more importantly, they had a campaign where they showed the damage of Hurricane Katrina. They showed you in a way that was very visceral exactly what shifted. And this is one of those moments where you realize, and digital gave you the ability to also look backwards as well as look forwards in many ways. They gave you street views of Times Square and the pyramids. The Street View camera was something that at the time seemed ridiculous, and it seemed like an expenditure that was unnecessary, but the reality is that it gives you rich contextual data in a way that you can't any other way. Now, in summarizing this is basically that what we just went through is effectively a product strategy plan that you can apply to any challenge. There are some very defined steps you can go through. You can label them however you want. This is how we choose to label them. But at its core, it doesn't matter what technology you're planning to use. It doesn't really matter the market you're trying to enter into. It all starts with understanding the real problem. It starts with drilling it down to the most human parts, understanding contextually what is happening, what are the systems that are limiting it, what are the technologies that are coming to market that can transform it. And this is part of learning about your competition. Many of them are stagnant, but there are others in related industries that are transforming business. Today, Brittany and I are working with a resort travel company, and they're taking lessons from what Google is doing. They're taking lessons from what cruise ships are doing, from what the Dallas Cowboys are doing. And a lot of those comparables can be matched up directly to your company, and it actually allows you to jump leaps and bounds without having to fail as expensively as the other guys did.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind as well is, and why it's so important to start with a well-defined human problem statement is that oftentimes when you re-look at your problem statement, you don't take it from the standpoint of, I have an idea, and instead you turn it around to, okay, well, who will that idea impact? Why do they need it? Do they really need it? You can start to get down to the real root of what that problem statement is, and oftentimes it gives you the opportunity to see it from different perspectives. And sometimes your competition is no longer just people who are within the same vertical as you. They're not necessarily going to be people using the same technologies as you. And it gives you a chance to look at your competition from multiple angles and find new insights you might have missed otherwise.
Now, back to step 3 is that once you've assessed the underlying causes of what got you here, once you understand where you need to get to, what the human challenges are that you need to conquer to getting there, and once you've assessed the industry and the grander platform of technologies available, it's time to think like a startup. I don't care if you're a single freelancer, if you're a mega corporation, or if you're a large agency. You need to drill it down. You need to focus on what do I need to do if this is the last and only opportunity I have to solve this. And this is the point, is you can fail multiple times, but every time you need to strive to solve that one thing. And so many startups fail because they try to solve too many things together. They don't look at the systemic pieces of it and lay out a long-term roadmap that identifies how you grow that problem. And there's a lot of examples of those silly memes, right? That an MVP isn't a cheaper car and then it grows to an SUV. It's basically a pair of roller skates. It's the skateboard. It's how do you get people moving first? You need to get them on your train. You need to get them imagining what you can see. Then they'll join you. Then they'll forgive you. And at that point, you can learn from them. And this is the thing: is you need to treat your failures as a step closer to the right direction. There's something measurable in every part of that. There's something you can learn constantly. And research is quite underrepresented in that. Every time you give somebody something, there's something they can tell you that likely you don't understand or you didn't realize, and that is extremely valuable. Because we can look at A/B testing as a way to solve problems, but A/B testing is extremely expensive because by that point you need to go backwards, refit something, relaunch it, retest it, reconfigure. By the time you got to A/B, you've probably lost a lot of money that you could have solved with testing, research, and a smaller knit testing group.
Yeah, and one thing that often ends up accidentally costing a lot more money and time is not having a hypothesis that you're testing for when you're creating MVPs or when you're doing your research or really anything. Anytime that you are looking into something, researching something, trying to validate or trying to fail to see if that is what happens, you need to understand why you're doing it and what you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah. But then beyond that, if you want to be successful, you got to wow people. But sometimes wowing people takes 5 years, like we saw with Google Maps. Google Maps' most impressive features have come out this year, and they're blowing it away. But it's because they've built up so much equity with people. Now, this is the strategy that we use. We use it in countless projects. It's something that I truly hope that you can apply in some form with your projects. If you have any questions about it, I would love to help you with them, because the reality is a lot of businesses try to just copy their competitors rather than learn from them. And this is the thing, is we've done this in many, many ways, and there is a way to make something special constantly. People are craving new ways of thinking, and it's out there. There's countless ways to gain that information. There's countless ways of looking at the same problem, but in a new methodology. And I hope you can apply that too. All right, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free.
Okay. Well, if you, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say thanks, guys. That was very informative.
Cool.
Well, thank you for attending. Is there any specific area that you have questions on, or in terms of how you could apply it to your challenges?
Personally, I need to kind of digest a little bit. That was a huge learning experience for me listening to that.
Sure. Fantastic. I'm certain that they'll allow us to send you the deck, and again, if you have any questions afterwards, feel free. Both of us, Brittany and I, have come from primarily campaign backgrounds, but this is the thing, is a lot of this way of looking at things can be used even just from the simplest of campaign views, let alone from grand product strategy standpoints. So there are lessons from it, and honestly, like, these lessons are ones we've learned from many other companies who've done the same things. And we talked about innovation labs, and there's a reason these are becoming so popular, because every company is realizing that people who work in the main structure are so committed to keeping it alive that you need people who are experimental.